Sir, will you please take the roll?
Just a second, Senator, while we spool up for YouTube. We're almost there.
Okay, and thank you for the promotion. I'm good with that.
And we are live.
All right, thank you. So this is Joint Conference Committee for House Bill number 47, Secretary of State Expedited Filings, and we've called the meeting to order. Let's please take the roll.
Senator Driscoll. Here. Senator Smith.
Here.
Senator Lucas. Or excuse me, Representative Lucas.
Here.
Representative Pendergrass.
Here.
Made the big time. Representative Barrett.
Here.
Representative Robbins.
Here.
Okay, so are there, well, let's see if there's any comment from the secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your work in the session and the great work that is being done here as we wrap up this session. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my right is Joe Rubino, our General Counsel, and then also our Policy Director. And to my left is Colin Crossman, our Business Director. There's a couple things I want to reiterate. I will be brief. Certainly House Bill 47, the result of this bill, I think, is another tool that will make Wyoming more attractive to business entities looking for regulatory certainty. And speaking with some members of the business community, there is at least some appetite for this regulatory certainty, and I think it's safe to assume that the passage of this bill will add to the exponential growth in business filings and revenue our staff of 11 full-time employees is facing. And that leads into, one of the key points and one of the key differences between the House and Senate. That said, as I did state during the interim, and when this bill has been considered previously, this bill has an administrative impact on our existing staff. It affects our workflow, and this bill does add another manual duty to our staff in our business division, meaning they're going to need to be touching these documents to adjust where they are in the queue. That's why we're asking for one additional staff employee to carry out the duties of this bill. A little bit of background briefly, we've seen 75%, we've seen enormous growth in business filing volume and revenue over the last several years. About 75% of this growth in revenue is due to our exponential increase in business entity filings. For example, in fiscal year 2024, we had 675,000 filings, up from 590,000 in fiscal year 2023. That's a 14% increase. And then in terms of revenue, the corresponding increase is from $50 million to $50 million and change in fiscal year 2024, up from $42 million, $42.3 million in fiscal year 2023. That's approximately a 19% increase. So this position will pay for itself in a little over a day. And want to be clear on that. That's off our total business filing revenue. We're one of the few revenue centers the state has, and it's very important that we continue to provide strong customer service and also attack the business fraud that we're seeing out there. We expect that this exponential growth will continue as Wyoming becomes more competitive and remains number 2 in the nation behind Delaware for volume of processing business filings. However, as recently reported, we're actually number 1 in the nation, leading the nation for new business incorporations per capita. And it's a pretty big deal to pass Delaware in anything related to business incorporations. And it's a per capita statistic, but Delaware doesn't have huge population either, is a pretty big deal and made national headlines. We're very proud of the work we do. However, expediting business filings, no matter the volume, will inevitably lead to increased burden, as it will require human intervention to expedite the processing of filings by a trained staff member in our office. And we've employed extraordinary measures, have multiple FDEs, if you say that it's, probably 40% of this position and 30% of this position in other divisions that are doing business filings. It's multiple FTEs that in other divisions are doing business filings on behalf of the business division. So we've really exhausted cross-divisional help. This informed our office's request throughout the interim to request additional staff with this bill, as it will have an impact on our office, and we want to ensure that existing deadlines are met. And again, to give a little background on this, we have a 15-day statutory deadline that we have to meet in our office. That's a little different from how other states do it. States like Delaware have no deadline, and then they have an expedited filing process on the back end, and they say, we'll get to it when we'll get to it if you don't expedite. We have this 15-day statutory deadline, and we're building this expedited filing process around it. And the bill was amended to include this request. And however, it provided that it would only be allocated should our supplemental budget request not contain one or more positions. So we're not pancaking positions if the supplemental budget did pass, which looks like is very unlikely at this point. And I wanted to lead into a few things that have changed in terms of the analysis on this. In the Senate Appropriations Committee, it was said that this would be handled in the budget. Well, looks like we're not going to have a supplemental budget this year, so it is, I think, very emergent that we handle it in this bill. And then also wanted to, this whole notion that we're not having positions in bills. Did find a couple bills where that did happen. Just want to push back on that a little bit. Senate File 127, and then, which was vetoed by the governor but did pass. And then Senate File 191, which is up on concurrence today, does have some positions in it. So this is not unprecedented, and wanted to be clear on that. In terms of the amendments themselves, so wanted to first start with House Bill 47, Standing Committee Amendment 001. That's with Heiner chairman. It was the amendment that came out of the Minerals Committee with the position. Obviously, we're very in support of that amendment, A, B, and C there. And then on the Senate side, the one amendment was House Bill 47, Standing Committee Amendment number 1. Senator Driscoll was the acting chairman, so it has his name on the bottom. And we're fine with this thing that came in about increasing the fee in line with CPI. So that's lines 5 through 10. It's the other lines that have to do with deleting the position when that came in the Senate. So that's lines 1 through 4, and then lines 12 through the end of the amendment, 12 through 17, that we take issue with. So again, lines 5 through 11 on the Standing Committee Amendment number 1. On the Senate side, that's the CPI increase on the fee. We're totally fine with that. That's lines 5 through 10. But then it's lines 1 through 3, and then lines 12 through 17 is taking out the position that was in the House version, and that is what we respectfully object to. But those are kind of running through the amendments, and thank you very much for your time, and if there's any questions, happy to answer any.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary of State, I have a question for your business director.
Yes.
Mr. Crossman, I know you, I've met with you several times on this, and just want to ask you, so is this going to increase your workload?
Crossman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The creation of additional queues and the managing of those queues will create additional workload for the top line people, not the frontline registrars. They won't be taking part in this. The people who will be the kinds of documents that will be subject to this are going to be the more complicated mergers and acquisitions, the things that have to be done for another jurisdiction. And so not only do they have to be processed immediately, which means setting aside all other work to make sure that this thing gets done, but they're also more complicated. So while under a normal situation, we'd be able to manage that workload, now it's an interrupt, okay? And that automatically creates more work just by that. And the fact that they have to be, those documents, if they come in with errors, but they have the immediate return, we have to contact them, reach out and try to get them fixed so that they can get filed immediately.
That's enough. I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, just one more question.
Go ahead.
So this is not work that can be automated just to clarify, this is, do you need personnel?
Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the kind of things that will be requested for expedited filing are the kinds of things that will require hand touching and much more, I guess, discernment than can generally be automated into a system. So, I mean, let's say it's a merger document. You have to actually understand what you're reading, go through it, and figure out if it's done properly, rather than, say, the initial filing or an annual report, which is easily automatable and would not really be subject to this thing.
Senator Driscoll.
Chairman Bear, do you anticipate that this bill is going to cause the need for one full-time position?
Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe what we had in there was that the position, the work that expedited filings will generate is less than a full-time position, but we can't hire half a person. So in order to bring that in, it would be a full-time position.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead, Senator Driscoll.
Could you walk me through the process of getting this implemented? You're going to do a rate sheet and a bunch of stuff, and I believe we're going to have to go through rulemaking. What's the length of the window that it's going to take you to stand up this program? And then what do you anticipate, being that nobody knows about it, what do you anticipate is the workload on it between now and February?
Looks like Mr. Rubino wants to answer that. Mr. Rubino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Rubino, I'm the Policy Director and Counsel with the Secretary of State's office. I'll be brief and then I'll yield it back over to the Secretary and Mr. Crossman. I think all three of us have had discussions with this along with our deputy. In terms of the rulemaking itself, I act as the agency liaison for a number of rulemakings that we've made. And what you have is a minimum 45 days after promulgation for public comment. Within that, there's an opportunity for a public hearing. And that's for the proposed rules. And then upon final adoption, then the governor has 75 days from the moment that the rules are submitted to the registrar. Our office also acts as the registrar of rules to do that. So we'd begin work on promulgation. We've already discussed how this would work. It would, as we discussed in front of all of you at one point or another, either throughout the interim or this session, what we envision this being is a tiered system for how documents would be processed and the different level of tiers for what had been envisioned by the Blockchain Committee in our discussions. How this would carry out is there'd be different tiers for different levels of expedition for filing a document. So yeah, for a merger and an acquisition, depending on when they got involved or the law firm got involved from New York or wherever, it could be as same day service or next day service, 2 or 3 days, and then it goes out from there. And so that's one of the things, when we had discussed originally with the Senate Appropriations Committee, I think that really is a good idea there that lines, if I'm looking at the Page 2, beginning on line 5, the adjusted inflation biannually. I think that takes a lot of foresight, and from our position, I think that would certainly be incorporated into the rulemaking process. Mr. Secretary, maybe you can add on a little bit for that, but I think that's sort of how this would be carried out, and then it would be the different emergent levels of expedition of the document, meaning how our staff would need to descend on it and take care of one or more to expedite those in accordance with the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe the Secretary said that this position would be paid for in 1 day. That seems rather spectacular. Would you be willing to elaborate a little bit on how you came to that statement, the math behind it?
Mr. Secretary.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just took the total amount of revenue and divided by a number of days and matched it with what the appropriation is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said you start with Yeah. You start with the total revenue. You mean total revenue into the department, or just kind of clear in my own mind?
Mr. Chairman, pretty sure I used the business revenue. I'm happy to redo the calculation right now if we need to.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and I appreciate we had extensive conversations about this during the interim, and I certainly appreciate all of the points you make about needing more workforce effectively. But one of the things that, when we look at the statute itself, it basically says may. It gives the secretary the ability to either implement this or not. And I could imagine a circumstance where if you didn't have sufficient staff, that you would very infrequently implement it. And for example, you'd have a $5,000 level for just those rare mergers and acquisitions that are willing to foot the bill to get it that day, as a means of starting. And then obviously as positions came in, I think the strategy that you've all put together that was just outlined by Mr. Rubino is perfect, right? That's a great workflow to have. The concern I have, and this will probably come as no surprise, is even without the position, it seems like this is a good little bill, even if it's not as good as it would be with a position. And candidly, I'm worried about the fact that it wouldn't make it through the Senate with a position in it. I just don't think it would pass. But there seems to be a lot of value to just having that opportunity to set a very high bar. So, because statutorily right now, you can't do it. That's the challenge that we've faced when we've had conversations through the Blockchain Select Committee in the past where there were concerns about we literally can't do a merger or acquisition in Wyoming because we cannot have a date certain. So what about, in getting to Senator Driscoll's discussion about rules, I feel like we could potentially pass this legislation without the position and then work through the budget on getting perhaps multiple positions, because I'm 100% sympathetic with the fact that you guys do a tremendous job with the business division. It's exceptional. We know that we're second to none in the world, probably, on business division, and we need more personnel. But at the same time, I just don't think we necessarily have the horses to get this bill with a position passed. So wouldn't we be better off getting the bill passed with a may in it and then focus on the positions, which was obviously what we talked about during the interim, just separating. We've got a policy and we've got a budget process. Let's not link the two. Mr. Secretary, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the proper way to do these bills, and when I was in the legislature, that's always the way we did it, was that when a bill had a workload increase, that would be considered during the process. And this does have a workload increase. And in terms of your comment about just getting it through or jamming it through, or whatever word you want to use, I mean, if it goes away, it goes away. And I'm content with that if we can't properly do this the right way, which is to have it paid for with the workload increase that is going to be there. And the political situation over there is what it is. And, we have bills that have positions in there that have gone through. And so my question, and I'm not posing this to you, but my rhetorical question is why wouldn't a bill go through that clearly does have a workload increase through that body? And I start, when I get home at night, start inserting certain things in my head that I probably won't say here. But it's disappointing. And it's time for us to do this right. Let's bring it through. I think the House has been clear that we're going to bring it through right. And I leave it to you. And I watch you a lot. And you are very strong rhetorically. And I think you can bring it through the Senate. And so I think we should do it right. Thank you.
Can I follow up real quick?
Please, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the workload, and I know that you all have provided the idea accurately that this is not requiring a full FTE. This requires a portional FTE, but you've got effectively overlarge workload at this point in time. So I understand that argument. But at the same time, depending on where you set the rates and how you set the program, it honestly does seem to me that you could easily set this at a place where you wouldn't get 5 of these in a year. You can do what Mr. Rubino said, and you could have a structured scale where you'd get hundreds of these, right? I mean, there's no question you could generate a sufficient workload for even more than a full FTE in this space if you structured your program accordingly. But at the same time, do you think I'm mistaken in thinking that if you set it at 5K just for those emergent cases, where 5K is even more than what other states require right now? I think 3K was what you found to be kind of the peak of other states. 2K, okay. I know that you did that research. I didn't do that research. It seems to me you would get up to 5, maybe 10 in an entire year. But you obviously have more experience on the number of mergers and acquisitions and those types of high-level interactions that you've experienced. So my question is, how many of these types of engagements, looking back over the past few years, have you had that might have participated in the ultra-high tier 5K that we could expect over the next year?
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we don't have a projection on that. I think we were conservative with our fiscal note. I think we could have bit 1 FTE and justified it. I'm a conservative guy, and I really think it may very well be an FTE as I've thought about it more. So, yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you do not.
What's the committee's pleasure? Any
Move the
motions?
bill.
I'm sorry?
I motion we move the bill.
Move the bill. Okay. So,
Oh,
Well, we need a.
yeah, my bad. Yeah,
No worries.
Go ahead. I know that there's probably an amendment coming over here. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Pendergraft, go ahead.
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Pendergraft.
Chairman. Looking at Amendment HB 0047, SS 01, I would move to divide that amendment. Division 1 would be lines 5 through 10, and the remainder would be Division 2.
I'll rule that as divisible.
Regarding Division 1, lines 5 through 10, I would like to vote on that and recommend an aye.
All right, you've heard the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Pendergraft's motion to approve of Senate? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, we are working off of the concurrence request, unfortunately, although I had it pulled up on my phone. But
Okay, so on this one here,
you're thinking through
yep, so you can
here.
see the line numbers
Yeah.
here.
My confusion is that this part needs to go with this part.
Correct, that's
So-
right. So it's,
Yeah.
So
it's,
5 through 10, and then the balance of it,
Correct.
so this page 2, line 5.
so these title,
Yeah.
short title,
Are
or
going
long
with,
title
are
items.
going with Division
Are
2.
going with Division 2.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, I
Nope, that's
should have
okay.
brought down the amendment itself as well.
We want to be clear on
So what
that.
page is
Yeah,
that?
so we're just on the page 2, line 5 insertion of the cost, the consumer price index,
Okay.
voting on that. Thank you for the
Okay, so
clarification.
this
I
is the
appreciate it.
consumer price index adjustment to the fee.
Yep.
All right, any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of Representative Pendergraft's motion to approve of the Senate amendment lines 5 through 10 for the standing committee amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? All right, that carries. And Division 2?
Division 2, part of what my question was I was trying to get to, and Senator Roth was actually kind of helped pull that up. I was trying to get to, by now adding this 5,000, how much is that going to generate? Is that going to change the overall? And my impression from other conversations with both the secretary and Mr. Crossman, is that there is quite a market there. And I look at this and in my own little construction world, hey, we got a load of wood for you. We're gonna drop it off, but you gotta have a man on the dock. And I feel like there's an opportunity to bring in even more revenue. And we just need to have that guy there with a forklift and to get that off of there. So I'm recommending an aye on Division 2 as well.
Mr. Chairman,
I think your testimony and your recommend are completely opposite of each other.
I think you want to know based on what you said.
Yes. Because this Division 2 deletes the standing committee amendment from the House.
I apologize.
Yeah. No worries.
Okay, so Pendergraft is recommending a no on Division 2. Further discussion on Division 2?
yes, sir, I was going to point that out first, was going to be my first part. The second part is, as we go through the rulemaking process, we're 200 days in, 7 months. We're going to be back. If they do rulemaking and create this, and I'm fully supportive, I think he probably needs more than one position.
Okay.
But I don't think there's any likelihood that there's going to be any number of them come before we're back in session. And I'll stand opposed to hiring somebody preemptively to do it when we're going through rulemaking. If they do the rulemaking, do it correctly, get the rate sheet, which will also help us figure out exactly what that load might be, and it might help them figure out what it's going to be. How many 5,000s are we going to have and where it's going to be at? So I'll stand opposed to it. Thank you.
So again, opposed would be an aye vote on Division 2. Yes. Okay. Senator Smith.
I'll be against it. So, Representative Pendergraft said, no, just go a little further and say, it's kind of like you have a guy on the dock and he's unloading and he's got a full dock and we're like, hey, you know what? We just struck a deal, man. We're gonna give you a whole bunch more loads to unload, but we're not gonna give you any more staff. So I'm concerned that we have a situation where we have a business division that's exploded. That's, I mean, if your business went from, I don't know, maybe you were doing 100,000, now you're doing 300,000. These guys have gone, I think they were at a couple 100,000 filings a year, now they're at 600,000. It's just a massive load. I don't care any way you look at it, they need more employees. And this is the proper channel, we can do it. And if it was properly explained in the Senate, I think people would be for it. It doesn't violate any protocol in my mind, or that I can see. And I don't see why we don't just try to get this passed and get both houses to concur on it and get it done. I mean, it's one employee.
Further discussion on Division 2, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you. I'll make one last plea. I did spend some time in the Secretary's office. Went around and spoke to a number of the employees, watched how they do things. We talked about cross-training, about how everybody, from the top to the bottom are jumping in there and opening the mail. And speaking of opening the mail, they had an incident which cost them some time. We know that they're already under I think it's a 14-day turnaround. And they're already pushing 12, 13 day, day 12 or 13 at this point. It just seems to me like the sooner we get somebody in there, the sooner we can help that out. And I don't see a reason to delay personally, so I'll be a no.
Co-Chair Rothfuss, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, we worked this bill in the interim, and it was a simple bill that just provided the authorization to the Secretary of State's office to do this if they chose. And we very intentionally tried to stay out of the FTEs and appropriations and budget, recognizing that that was the responsibility of the Joint Appropriations Committee, and knowing that this topic is a lot broader than just this bill. This was supposed to be a narrow little bill with a narrow little purpose that resolved some problems that we had become aware of through the Select Committee. And it was, that's what we brought to the legislature, and it's a good little bill. It's unfortunate, honestly, that it ended up being the centerpiece of a debate on how many positions the Secretary of State's office needs. And I don't disagree in any way. I really do applaud that office and how hard they work. The business office does an exceptional job. We know that. And they, in my opinion, are overworked and need positions. We know that. But the concern I have is honestly, this is just not something that is going to pass the Senate if we add a position to it. It happily passed the Senate when it wasn't an appropriations bill. And we're at a position where we either need a third option, I don't know what that option is, or to revert to the original Senate position, because it's just not something that is going to go through the chamber. I can't feel comfortable adding a position through this bill when, again, realistically, and we had this discussion during the offseason, if you've got a queue of 10 tasks and you point to task number 7 and say, let's do that one first, and you move it to the top of the stack, you haven't changed your workload. You've restructured your workload. And this bill allows you to do that. You've got the same queue, tasks 1 through 10, but I am going to take task 7 and move it to the top. That's all the bill does. It does not create more work. We do expect in the long run it will create more work, because this is something that businesses want, and this is something that would allow larger businesses to domicile in the state of Wyoming. So I do anticipate it will lead to further growth, and we've seen tremendous growth already, and I hope to have been a participant in creating that growth. Over the past 15 years, I've passed a lot of bills related to this, and I believe that I may have contributed to that growth. But I just cannot see where this bill is sufficient justification to increase the number of FTEs in that department by something like 10%. I can't remember what the current staff is, but I think is
19, I think you said, correct?
so 5% increase, something in that. Because you're just reordering the stack. That's it. And that's why, I can't support deleting this provision and support, keeping the Senate amendment intact. In my view, and I don't know what a third option would be, I'm happy to explore them, but in my view, if we add the position back in, that's tantamount to killing the bill.
Mr. Chairman, a little follow-up on that.
Go ahead, Senator
I
Driscoll.
think the good senator hit it on the head. This came out of the Senate. This very debate we're having right here was debated extensively on the floor, and we came out with a 29-2 vote on it. It's not a split vote. This was a hardcore, this is where we're at. It leaves us little room to negotiate on the Senate side as far as if you want it to pass on that side. I tend to agree with the good senator next to me that I'm open to some other solution if we can figure one out, but I don't think any way, even if we went with you, that it passes the floor on our side. It's just that simple.
Further discussion on Division 2. All right, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and make a comment here. I'd like to address some of the points that were made. First of all, I'd like to talk about hiring a position. It just takes time to do that, and so does rulemaking. I think the point is valid that it's going to take some time to make some rules, but this position, if passed, wouldn't be available till July 1st. So I think it could work in conjunction with the hiring process. If they were to be hired early, we know that this particular department has ample work, and they could get their numbers down on their regular non-expedited work with an additional position until such time as a rulemaking process was done, should they get them hired expeditiously. I would push back, Co-Chair, on the idea that rearranging the work does not, and expediting some work does not require additional effort. It really does, and I haven't yet to see an instance where you're charging for more work to put something in an expedited manner. You're putting someone else's work behind it, and yet it still has a deadline. So something has to be sped up, and the individuals who do the work are going to have to do the speeding up to get those things accomplished, whether it's the one that moves to the front or whether it's the ones that are delayed now and still have a 15-day timeline. So I think it's appropriate. Now, I do understand your guys' point on your body's unwillingness to do that. I do agree with the secretary that the two of you can be very influential if you would embrace this. But, you know, I think that we have those opportunities to find that third position probably in a free committee if it should go there. I would hope that we could get it done here, but I'm not opposed to a free committee if that's what it goes to. So with that, we'll go ahead and take the vote on Division 2. All those in favor of Pendergrass's motion for Division 2, say aye.
Point of order.
Yep.
Yeah, that phrasing of that, so we need to know what ayes and noes are on this one.
Yep.
I think Representative Pendergrass was encouraging us to vote, as I recall, against.
Correct.
Okay.
And I vote would carry the Senate's position.
Correct. Okay, just.
Deleting,
making sure that we're
and I think, I appreciate you're bringing the point, because I want to clarify something as well. So this body can help me with that, and that is the standing committee amendment in the House was deleted by this standing committee amendment in the Senate. So if we defeat Division 2, that defeats the deletion of the House standing committee amendment, and then the House standing committee amendment would be the position of this committee. Would that be correct?
Yes.
I want to know if the result is not
Yeah.
So if so, we should probably take a vote on,
whether we reinstate the position or not. It needs to be clear. I
yeah,
don't wanna- I
yeah,
don't want to vote.
that's fine.
Clarity, yeah.
Just
Let's-
for clarity,
yeah,
I'll.
let's make the
I'll-
motion to
We'll
reinstate.
vote on the division, and then we'll take up, I'll accept a motion on reinstating amendment, the standing committee amendment in the House, which institutes the position. Okay? So with that, we're on Representative Pendergrass's motion for Division 2 of the Senate Standing Committee Amendment. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. No. Okay, that was defeated. Now, for clarity's sake, can I have a motion on the House Standing Committee Amendment? What I'd like to hear is a motion to accept, I can share it with you.
Yeah, that's
It's this one here. That's the position that establishes the position.
Just a motion to adopt that.
Right. So this would go back to the House position, but based on our prior votes, we would include the Senate position for the inflation-adjusted fee. Okay? So is the motion clear? Do I have a second on the motion? Seconded by Lucas. All right. Any discussion on the amendment, on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of Pendergrass's motion to reinstate the House Standing Committee Amendment in which institutes the position and funds it, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no?
No.
Okay, that carries. All right. Are there any further motions? Okay. Seeing none,
So,
I just heard.
yeah, that,
Senate position was no, and it fails.
yeah,
You don't get
in,
counts.
in conference committees, it's each voting separately.
okay, that's right.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, got it. Okay, so House position passed and Senate position failed. Okay? All right.
No, it's not.
House passed.
Senate failed. Two no, one aye. On that. Okay. So as far as a conference committee agreement, I don't have a form. Do you have a form for the conference committee agreement?
Mr. Chairman, I do not.
No, yeah, we don't. So if, at this point, though, we've basically failed to reach.
Correct.
agreement. So we just adjourn without action, basically.
Okay.
And if we, the question is, do we want to call this final at this point, which seems reasonable, because I think, as you point out, if we're looking for a third option, that third option is going to be outside of our two positions.
Correct.
So I do think it's appropriate for us to terminate this, and let's see, no, I guess you take that action to initiate, since it's a House bill.
Okay. So I think the terminology is we'll terminate this joint conference committee.
Yep.
At this point.
Yep.
And this particular bill will fail based on that
Yep.
disagreement.
Unless we reappoint. And
Now, we'll go back to our chambers and announce that, and it'll be up to the
presiding officer
presiding officer to
to
determine if
decide
it's
whether
gonna
to reappoint.
reappoint a-
That is correct.
a secretary.
Yep, and I hope you'll try and get that done.
Sure.
And I will also try and get that done.
Okay.
And we'll communicate and see whether we're making any progress or not.
Very well. All right.
Thank
We're
you all,
adjourned.
appreciate your
Thank you.
time.